Among history's wealthiest individuals stands Andrew Carnegie, a figure whose contradictions matched his fortune. When he finally sold his industrial empire, his personal wealth represented approximately 2% of the entire American economy. This is the story of how a Scottish immigrant with merely 5 years of formal education transformed himself from destitute child laborer into the planet's wealthiest man. Carnegie's journey didn't begin on American soil. His origins trace to Dunfermline, Scotland, where crushing poverty defined his childhood. His mother labored continuously stitching shoes together, while his father operated a hand-weaving loom, producing cloth and fabrics. Their modest existence faced catastrophe when steam-powered looms emerged, rendering his father's manual equipment obsolete. The Industrial Revolution, that would eventually make Carnegie wealthy, first devastated his family. Watching his father desperately search for any available work left profound psychological scars on young Andrew that would shape his future worldview. The year 1848 marked a turning point. The Carnegie family liquidated everything they owned and borrowed £20 to finance their escape from Scotland. They embarked toward America, the land promising opportunity to those willing to seize it. Pittsburgh became their destination, a manufacturing center where they hoped to rebuild. Unfortunately, hardship followed them across the Atlantic. Both parents struggled finding steady employment in their adopted country, forcing Andrew to abandon his education and enter the workforce to keep his family fed. His break from brutal boiler room labor came when he secured a position at a telegraph office. As a messenger boy, Andrew cycled throughout Pittsburgh delivering telegrams. He memorized every recipient's face, greeting them personally whenever their paths crossed outside work. This habit provided Andrew invaluable exposure to Pittsburgh's business elite, familiarizing himself with the commercial community. At 17, he mastered telegraph operations, developing remarkable skill interpreting Morse code. His ability to recite messages without transcribing them attracted attention from Thomas Scott, a regional manager at the Pennsylvania Railroad Company, who hired Andrew as his personal telegrapher and private secretary for $35 monthly. The Pennsylvania Railroad Company held status as the world's largest corporation at that time. For the ambitious Carnegie, this represented an unparalleled opportunity to observe successful business operations from the inside. Tom Scott recognized Andrew's potential and adopted a mentorship role, functioning as a second father figure. Scott encouraged Carnegie to invest in stocks, providing his first experience with capitalist investment strategies. The American Civil War arrived, and Carnegie received his draft notice for the Union Army. Rather than serve directly in combat, Carnegie chose a different path, paying $850 for a substitute to fight in his place. While others risked their lives on battlefields, Carnegie spotted opportunity. He observed that wooden bridges burned easily when troops set them ablaze, creating desperate demand for iron bridges as replacements. He capitalized on this need by establishing the Keystone Bridge Company, but his next strategic move demonstrated true business acumen. Keystone didn't merely construct bridges. The company also operated its own iron mills, controlling the raw material supply needed for bridge construction. Owning the iron source meant Carnegie's bridge company avoided dependence on external mining or extraction firms, unlike competitors. This vertical integration gave Carnegie complete process control while significantly improving profit margins. After completing bridge construction, he leveraged his railroad industry connections to generate additional revenue. Essentially, he orchestrated 3 interconnected businesses that reinforced each other. First, a mining extraction operation. Second, a bridge construction company utilizing iron from his mining business. Third, once bridges were completed, his railroad enterprise profited by selling rail. This synergistic concept functioned flawlessly. Perpetually seeking bigger opportunities, Andrew targeted New York City, the undisputed global business capital. He anticipated encountering ambitious culture and networking with distinguished businessmen, but reality disappointed him profoundly. He characterized the wealthy individuals surrounding him as scoundrels. Carnegie wrote himself a personal note, pledging that within 2 years, when reaching 35, he would retire and dedicate himself to improving society. This promise would remain unfulfilled. In 1856, Henry Bessemer invented the Bessemer converter, a pear-shaped furnace enabling mass steel production, previously considered impossible. For the first time ever, constructing large structures from steel became feasible, eventually birthing the first skyscrapers that would forever transform urban skylines. Carnegie moved with extraordinary speed, successfully establishing America's first steel plants. He hired the finest engineers and architects money could secure. He focused obsessively on increasing efficiency, constantly implementing cutting-edge technology while pushing employees to their absolute physical and mental limits. He gained notoriety for requiring employees to work 364 days annually, permitting rest only on the 4th of July. As technology advanced, he sought every possible opportunity to replace human workers with machinery. Unlike men, machines required no sleep, demanded no raises, and certainly never attempted unionizing. Carnegie, a master salesman, made a clever decision regarding his venture's name. Rather than calling it Carnegie Steel, he named it J. Edgar Thompson Steel Works, after one of his railroad industry customers. Carnegie hoped a steel mill bearing a customer's name would demonstrate appreciation for their business while potentially securing additional railroad orders. The strategy succeeded. Thompson's first order consisted of 2,000 steel rails. Naming a mill after a customer transcended mere sales tactics. It represented part of a larger strategy demonstrating public appreciation for others. Actions like this would continue generating massive dividends throughout the industrialist's career. To help manage Carnegie's steel mills, he recruited a ruthless executive known for merciless efficiency and bottom-line focus, Henry Clay Frick. Together, Carnegie and Frick formed a formidable force. To illustrate their ruthlessness, consider the Duquesne Works story. With Frick's assistance, Carnegie spread rumors alleging that Duquesne's mill produced defective steel. The claim was false, but truth didn't matter. Carnegie told Duquesne's railroad customers that their rails lacked what he termed homogeneity. Few people actually understood what the word meant, but that proved irrelevant. Carnegie used the term because it sounded sufficiently frightening to alarm railroads concerned about product quality. If Duquesne's sales declined, they would eventually become unprofitable and exhaust their capital. To accelerate their collapse, Carnegie and Frick proceeded to undercut Duquesne on pricing, further squeezing the company. Within 2 years, Duquesne's financial situation deteriorated catastrophically, leaving no alternative but selling to Carnegie at a bargain price. For Frick and Carnegie, the engagement rules were crystal clear: do whatever necessary to win. But this ruthlessness carried a substantial price, as they would soon discover at one of their largest steel plants in Homestead, Pennsylvania. Carnegie had recently invested millions optimizing Homestead's efficiency, enabling it to produce more steel than any comparably sized mill. But another component of the profit machine required optimization: labor costs. This posed a problem for Carnegie, who had been working on rebranding his image from oppressive steel factory billionaire to champion of workers' rights. So instead of risking his reputation, he would have his right-hand lieutenant, Henry Frick, execute the unpleasant work. Meanwhile, Carnegie would distance himself, traveling abroad to his homeland of Scotland. Carnegie understood he shouldn't be present after cutting wages for 10,000 already frustrated, underpaid workers. In 1892, tensions between workers and mill owners reached particularly heightened levels after an ever-widening wealth gap continued expanding. America's richest individuals were accumulating fortunes faster than any previous period in American history. Meanwhile, workers felt like property of the wealthy, and their diminishing voice could only be heard through union organization. Making matters worse, Frick, executing Carnegie's orders, demanded increased factory production, meaning even longer hours of grueling labor. But to compound the insult, Frick would not be increasing their income. He planned to reduce it. Longer hours and reduced pay brought Homestead to a boiling point. The strikers also demanded safer working conditions, and for excellent reasons. In 1898, 9% of all steel workers industry-wide would die on the job. When workers refused Frick's aggressive demands for extended hours and reduced pay, he decided to lock out all employees and bring in substitute immigrant workers willing to perform their dangerous jobs for less compensation. To escort the immigrant workers as they approached the factory, Frick called upon a 300-person private security force called the Pinkertons. Armed with rifles, they advanced toward the factory, where they encountered 10,000 angry strikers refusing to surrender what they considered home. Historians don't know who fired the first gunshot, but what we know is that the day would no longer be called the Homestead Strike, but rather the Homestead Massacre. By battle's end, 9 factory workers and 7 Pinkertons lay dead. Hundreds suffered injuries. The fighting grew so extreme that the governor ordered 8,000 militia troops to provide backup. Under the state troops' protection, the factory would reopen. Unfortunately for Carnegie's workers, they would be returning with lower pay, longer working hours, and identical safety conditions. Another casualty from Homestead came in the form of Carnegie's reputation. Prior to the Homestead tragedies, he would often publicly advocate for better conditions in steel mills and increased wages. But these words diverged drastically from his actions. Hypocrisy was incredibly prevalent. While he preached increased wages and improved safety conditions, he was simultaneously reducing labor costs by slashing paychecks and doing little, if anything, to make his factories safer workplaces. Carnegie was widely labeled a coward for using Frick as his scapegoat, not only for the tragedy, but for all the other unpleasant work he didn't want associated with his name. But despite the tensions and animosity, the steel mills continued thriving. In fact, by 1900, the company would produce more steel than the entire nation of Great Britain. But in 1901, Carnegie grew weary of the game and wanted to spend time with his wife and daughter. Financier J.P. Morgan was a rising competitor in the steel industry, and Carnegie, now nearing 70, became receptive to the idea of selling the company he'd spent his entire life building. Carnegie wrote on a scrap of paper what he would accept. Charles Schwab, the president of Carnegie Steel, delivered the offer to Morgan. As the story goes, J.P. Morgan glanced at the offer and without hesitation accepted it. Morgan would buy Carnegie Steel for $480 million, making Carnegie the single wealthiest man in the world at that time. Carnegie would completely sever ties with his business life and dedicate 100% of himself to serving the world through philanthropy. Not a single dollar would be left to his family. Because Andrew had only 5 years of schooling, he harbored a soft spot for libraries, which he credits for helping him achieve the financial success he acquired. Over the course of his life, he would donate over 2,500 libraries to cities worldwide. But it wasn't all self-promotion. He was generous for generosity's sake. His name was only displayed on fewer than 500 of those libraries. One example of his generosity is Carnegie Hall, one of New York's most recognizable landmarks. Built in 1891, Carnegie built and donated the building as the Music Hall. But its original name of the Music Hall was only changed to the current version after his death, and not by his request, but through the Music Hall's board members. And from 1901 until his death in 1919 in Lenox, Massachusetts, Carnegie's full-time occupation was distributing the vast wealth he had accumulated. As we mentioned at the beginning of this story, Carnegie was a man whose complexity matched his riches. His legacy remains deeply ambiguous, filled with contradictions that make simple moral judgment impossible. Consider the duality of his existence. On one hand, he pioneered industrial practices that transformed manufacturing, creating products that built modern cities and infrastructure. His steel constructed bridges, railroads, and skyscrapers that connected America and propelled it into the 20th century as an industrial superpower. His business innovations, particularly vertical integration, became blueprints for modern corporate strategy. His philanthropic contributions, especially his libraries, provided educational opportunities to millions who otherwise would have had none. On the other hand, his treatment of workers was frequently brutal. He preached one philosophy publicly while practicing another privately. He advocated for workers' rights in speeches and writings while simultaneously cutting wages and extending hours. He used intermediaries like Frick to execute harsh policies, maintaining plausible deniability while reaping the financial benefits. The Homestead Massacre stands as a dark stain on his legacy, a violent confrontation that resulted from his policies, even if he wasn't physically present. His philanthropic impulses also raise questions. Was his generosity genuine altruism or reputation management? Did he give away his fortune because he truly believed in helping humanity, or because he wanted to be remembered as something other than a ruthless industrialist? The timing of his charitable work, coming after he had already amassed his fortune through questionable means, suggests possible guilt or a desire for redemption. Yet the scale and thoughtfulness of his giving suggests sincere commitment to improving society. Carnegie's story also illustrates the extreme wealth inequality of the Gilded Age. One man could accumulate 2% of the entire American economy, while his workers toiled in dangerous conditions for minimal wages. This concentration of wealth and power in so few hands created social tensions that exploded in events like the Homestead Massacre. The era Carnegie dominated was characterized by extraordinary innovation and economic growth, but also by exploitation and suffering among working classes. His immigrant background adds another layer to understanding his story. He arrived in America with nothing, facing poverty and limited opportunities. His rise from these circumstances to unprecedented wealth represents the American dream in its purest form. Yet he then used his position to limit opportunities for other immigrants and workers, paying them minimal wages and subjecting them to harsh conditions. Did his difficult upbringing make him more sympathetic to struggling workers? Or did it convince him that anyone could succeed through hard work alone, making those who didn't succeed unworthy of better treatment? The question of whether Carnegie was a hero or villain ultimately depends on which aspects of his life we emphasize. If we focus on his philanthropic legacy, particularly his libraries and educational institutions that continue serving communities today, he appears as a generous benefactor who recognized his responsibility to give back. If we focus on his business practices, particularly events like the Homestead Massacre and his systematic exploitation of workers, he appears as a classic robber baron who built his fortune on the backs of suffering laborers. Perhaps the most accurate assessment is that Carnegie was both simultaneously. He was capable of genuine generosity and thoughtful philanthropy, while also being capable of ruthless business practices and exploitation. He sincerely believed in education and opportunity while denying fair wages and safe conditions to his own employees. He preached the gospel of wealth, arguing that the rich had a moral obligation to use their fortunes for public good, while accumulating that fortune through methods that harmed countless individuals. His legacy forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about capitalism, wealth, and morality. Can immense good accomplished through philanthropy redeem immense harm inflicted through business practices? Should we judge historical figures by the standards of their time or by contemporary ethical standards? How do we weigh the benefits of innovation and economic growth against the human costs of achieving them? These questions remain relevant today as we continue grappling with wealth inequality, workers' rights, and corporate responsibility. Carnegie himself seemed to struggle with these contradictions throughout his life. His early promise to retire at 35 and dedicate himself to public service suggests he recognized something troubling about his pursuit of wealth. Yet he couldn't walk away until he had become the richest man in the world. His eventual wholesale embrace of philanthropy, giving away virtually his entire fortune, suggests a man trying to reconcile his business practices with his stated values. In the end, Andrew Carnegie's story is distinctly American. An immigrant arrives with nothing, works tirelessly, seizes opportunities, employs questionable tactics, accumulates unprecedented wealth, and then tries to redeem himself through generosity. It's a story of extraordinary ambition, complex morality, and lasting impact. Whether we view him as primarily a hero or villain says as much about our own values and what we choose to prioritize as it does about Carnegie himself. His legacy remains contested precisely because it contains genuine elements of both exploitation and generosity, ruthlessness and philanthropy, hypocrisy, and sincere commitment to public good. He was, as stated at the beginning, as complex as he was rich, and his complexity ensures his story continues prompting debate and reflection on wealth, power, and responsibility in American society.